Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. Here we are once again. Yes, indeed. Saturday night, 9 o'clock on Manx Radio. H and Chris, we do the best in modern and contemporary jazz with Jumpin' In. What else?
Yes, welcome along to this week's Jumpin' In. And apologies if you were looking forward to the Minimalism in Jazz special with Nick Birch. But following on from the sad news this week that the Rolling Stones drummer of many years, Charlie Watts, has passed away, we decided that as a tribute, we dedicate an entire show to the music of Charlie and the Stones and his place within them, not only as a timekeeper, but also as a great jazz lover. We hope tonight's show will prove. So, H, when you've not been gathering moss, what's been giving you satisfaction this week?
All sorts, as they say. You know what's amazing? He was a real jazzer at heart, and not that long ago he met the Danish radio big band. We'll be hearing what the results of that came out like. Watts at Scott's, a place he'd spent many an hour, and something we saw way back in the day, his massive big band with, count them, 3 drummers live at Fulham Town Hall.
And from me, a series of Stones classics. See if you can guess them. A woman you can play like an old piano, perhaps a sprinkle on my porridge, a fitting conclusion. And although it's Saturday, let's start with Ruby Tuesday. Ruby Tuesday by the Rolling Stones, of course, but that arrangement from Mike Holliber and the Gotham Jazz Orchestra, taken from their 2009 release, Quake. A really great sounding band this week, featured on the show, of course, with one of their later releases, in fact, and a really clever arrangement, I think, which just goes to show if you start with a good melody, you can pretty much give it any kind of treatment you fancy.
Absolutely terrific stuff. You're listening to Jumpin' In. This is our Charlie Watts special. What's perhaps little known, that's he lived for a few months in Denmark in the early 1960s, in the very early days of the Rolling Stones, and the band was not yet a full-time band, hadn't sort of made the massive success that it went on to do. Charlie's still working in a day job, which led him to employment in Denmark for a few months, and his time in there, he hung out at the jazz and blues scene in Denmark, sitting in with various bands and keeping his passion for the music alive whilst earning a wage during the day. And because of this link with Denmark, this led many years later to Charlie Watts meets the Danish radio big band. This is with music selected and arranged and produced by the great trumpeter Gerard Presence. Charlie Watts and the Danish radio big band, a live concert from the Danish Radio Concert Hall, October 2010. And I think you'll recognise this track. Terrific stuff. You can't always get what you want. Composed, of course, by Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. Arranged there by Gerald Presenza, with Gerald himself taking solo duties on flugelhorn, and Pernille Bevor from the Danish radio big band taking the soprano sax solo. A cracking album that, if you haven't seen it. Charlie Watts meets the Danish radio big band from the concert hall in 2010. I rather enjoyed that, like I said, with Gerald Presenter, who also writes very good liner notes on the album as well. A great little piece off the back saying, where he says, many years ago, Red Rodney, the iconic jazz trumpeter who played with Charlie Parker and later Charlie Watts in his From One Charlie to Another Parker tribute project, said Charlie Watts' contribution to jazz is important as he's an ambassador for the music and introduces many new people to jazz. And he says it was not a very significant statement to me at the time. I was more interested in his mouthpiece, he says. But in an office in Paris last summer, I was reminded of what Red had said, as Jean-Philippe Allard from Universal Music said to me. He thought Charlie was an ambassador for jazz. And I knew I'd got the right label, the Universal Jazz Impulse, that came out on. A reminder as well on that one that, of course, Charlie was a great friend with one of our great friends on the jazz scene, Dave Green, the bass player. Yes,
indeed. And we were lucky enough to catch Charlie Watts Orchestra at the 12th Bracknell Festival. Could you give a punt on the year? What do you reckon?
Ooh, the Charlie, yes. Let me see now. That would be, I think, 1987.
And close but no cigar. It was 1986. The festival had been moved to Pendley Manor the year before after a major fallout with Bracknell Council about late night music, which actually put the whole festival in doubt. But it soldiered on for another couple of years after that. Watts had appeared at Bracknell, in fact, for a number of years prior to that with the Alexis Corner Blues Band and with the boogie band Rocket 88. Now, moving on, back in 2005, saxman Tim Rees, who'd been on the road with the Stones since 1999, managed the near impossible feat of getting a band of top-notch jazz players together, including a wide list of celebrities. With the Stones pushing a touring schedule, he got them together to record a mainly instrumental Rolling Stones project with the full blessings of the band. Then again, that's perhaps not surprising, as they were all on it. Here's a straight-ahead organ trio taken from it, with Larry Goldings on the B3, Tim on sax, and Charlie on the drums, giving a funky workout blues to Honky Tonk Woman. Rolling Stones project. What a great band too. Only a trio in that case, but the band features Brian Blade, Bill Sharp, Sheryl Crow, Michael Davis, Lisa Fisher, Bernard Fowler, Bill Frisell, Larry Goldings, Daryl Jones, Nora Jones, John Patitucci, Keith Richards, John Schofield, Ken Smith, Luciana Souza, and of course Charlie Watts and Ron E. Wood. On that case, Charlie on the drums, Larry Goldings on the mighty Hammond B3, and the project mastermind Tim Rees on sax. Yes, you're listening to Jumpin In on Manx Radio with myself, Chris, and Brother H, and tonight we're giving our tribute to the Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts, who passed away earlier this week.
Absolutely, and here's something a bit different, one I found on the shelves I'd completely forgotten about that came out a few years ago. Another project, the Charlie Watts Jim Keltner project, which sees Charlie and Jim experimenting with some jazz, some rhythms, some percussion, and dedicating it to, very many of the tracks, to some of the great drummers, Shelley Mann, Art Blakey, Kenny Clarke, Tony Williams, et al. This one sounds almost Pat Metheny-esque. Check this out. Now, you wouldn't necessarily guess that as being Charlie Watts, would you? But it is Charlie Watts' Jim Keltner project, an ambitious undertaking. It goes back to the 1990s at a Los Angeles recording studio. And on the notes it says it started with Jim and Charlie just messing around. Charlie and the Stones were in the midst of recording Bridges to Babylon at Ocean Way Studios in Los Angeles, and during their idle moments, when the rest of the band were going out for a cup of tea and an orange, I expect, Watts and Keltner, who was also participating in the Stones session, would slip away into another studio and just begin experimenting. There were some sampled sequences they wanted to do, Charlie says, and I decided to dedicate them to a lot of the great jazz drummers I'd enjoyed over the years, the likes of Billy Higgins, Roy Haynes, Elvin Jones, Tony Williams. It's got nothing to do with them as players, says Charlie. It's more the feeling I got off from just watching them or playing or hearing their records. It's a tribute to them all. And that one is dedicated or named after the great Brazilian percussionist, you might have guessed there, with that Brazilian back note and sort of percussive sounds and the guiro and such like going on. Airto. Great stuff. Very, very different.
Back now to saxman Tim Rees, who 3 years after the Rolling Stones project put together an even bigger band featuring all the musicians I mentioned before, plus additions of people like Jack DeJohnette, Larry Goldings was there, Yamagas Ferreira, Terasumo Hino, Chuck Leavell, the pianist with the Stones for many, many years, Ben Monda, Milton Nascimento, Eddie Palmieri, who else? Kazumi Watanabe, and lots of world musicians, giving the Rolling Stones world jazz and world music fusion treatments to the Stones catalogue. And you guessed it, the entire band came along too, including Mick. Here's Brown Sugar, but perhaps not as you've heard it before. Brown Sugar, given the Portuguese fado styling there with singer Ana Moura and Tim Rees once again on the sax, and of course Charlie Watts on the drums. This is a fascinating release actually to the Rolling Stones once again with an all-star cast, as I said, plus a host of perhaps lesser known world musicians giving a really interesting twist to the material.
Terrific stuff. You're listening to Chris and H. Jumpin' In. It's a Charlie Watts special, the Rolling Stones drummer. Our tribute to him and his love of jazz, his jazz roots. He said it never left him. He obviously made an awful lot of money and was world famous for his work with the Stones, but was always a jazzer at heart. And I think he maintained that right up until his last days, realistically. He said he always loved jazz, and in a few moments we'll hear a little bit from him at Ronnie Scott's. But back in the 1980s, and we had the great pleasure of seeing them, he, I think, managed to pull together, because he was Charlie Watts, the Charlie Watts Super Big Band. And it was a super big band. It was about 32-piece, from memory serves correct. They just did the one album, although there is a rare as hen's teeth recording of them at the Bracknell Festival, where we would be there. We could find it.
Yes.
I must admit. But they brought out one album, again pretty rare as hen's teeth as well, live at Fulham Town Hall on CD and album. The only copy I have it is on cassette, Grandad. It is on cassette, but I think it would be a good enough recording in any case. Stompin' at the Savoy. Let me see if I can push the button.
Hey, this is Tony the Tiger. Nice to finally meet the guys at Manx Radio. They're great!
Watts at Scott's, Charlie Watt and the Ten-Tet, featuring all the likes of Evan Parker, Peter King, the late Peter King, Mart Nightingale et al. And Charlie, of course, where he belongs, behind the drums. Before that, not one but three drummers, Charlie Watts, Bill Aden and John Stevens, the great character as well, driving the Charlie Watts Big Band, or Orchestra, I think as it was, live at Fulham Town Hall in 1986. Cracking stuff. Stomping at the Savoy, I think it was.
Indeed. We saw the band, as we said. Fantastic.
Oh,
and that's
yes.
about it for this week's show. Well, hopefully we've given you some little insight into the versatility and jazz heart of Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts. Next week, a week later than billed, we'll have a Minimalism in Jazz special, including an interview with Zen Funk originator Nick Birch. But for now, we'll leave this Rolling Stones tribute with a musician I missed off the list with Tim Reese before, and he was in there, but this is from his own album, John Schofield with Steve Swallow and Bill Stewart and the horn section, and their take on Satisfaction. See you next week.
Take care.